Good morning and welcome everyone to the 12th meeting of the Justice Committee. I thank all members, the Cabinet Secretary and his staff for their attendance today in these exceptional circumstances. I also thank our parliamentary staff, in particular the Broadcasting Office, for all their hard work in setting up this remote formal meeting of the committee. The committee recognises the very challenging times in which we are living, and we pay tribute to all the organisations in the justice sector for their continued and dedicated service and hard work at this time. And here, the committee also passes on its heartfelt condolences to the family and friends of the prison officer from HMYOI Polmont, who is the first prison officer to have died from coronavirus, and to the friends and family of all those involved in the justice sector who have been affected during this outbreak. Members do not want to place undue pressure on these bodies during this public health emergency, but as the First Minister has said, it is important that parliamentary scrutiny and accountability continues. That's why we have been writing to the Cabinet Secretary and others on a range of issues, such as changes to prison rules and the safety of prison staff and prisoners, plans for the release of certain types of prisoners, policing powers during the coronavirus crisis, the functioning of our courts, and proposals for solemn cases, and guidance on the rules for family contact during this crisis. I'm grateful, therefore, that the Cabinet Secretary and others for finding the time to answer questions from the committee and for the way that he and other bodies have responded so quickly to the written questions we have asked. All our letters and responses are on site. Our first item is to decide whether to take item 3 in private. This is to allow discussion amongst members on the evidence taken from the Cabinet Secretary today. Given the complexities of a group discussion over video conference, I'm assuming everyone agrees unless you say otherwise. Therefore, if members are happy to take item 3 in private, you do not need to respond, as this would require all your microphones to be active at once. Does anyone object? No? Then item 1 is agreed. Our main item of business this morning is an evidence session on how COVID-19 has impacted on the civil and criminal justice systems, on prisons, policing and the fire and rescue services. I welcome our witnesses, Humza Yusuf, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Justice, and Neil Rennick, Director of Justice, and Claire Hicks, Deputy Director, Police Division, the Scottish Government. I refer members to paper 1, which is a private paper by Spice and the clerks. In a moment, I will invite the Cabinet Secretary to make a short opening statement of up to 3 minutes. Unusually, because of the challenges of managing a virtual meeting such as this, we're going to take questions in a pre-arranged order. Once the Cabinet Secretary has made his opening remarks, I will invite members to ask questions. I will then invite the Cabinet Secretary to respond. I will then go back to each member and back to the Cabinet Secretary for any follow-up questions. Once completed, I will invite the next questioner and so on until the evidence session is concluded. I expect the evidence session to last for no more than 1 hour. Please keep your questions and answers succinct. And please give broadcasting staff a few seconds to operate your microphones before beginning to speak your question or to provide an answer. I now invite the Cabinet Secretary to make a short opening statement of up to 3 minutes. Cabinet Secretary.
Good morning, Convener, and good morning to members of the committee. I very much welcome the invitation and indeed the opportunity to engage with members in today's virtual Justice Committee session. Let me say first and foremost, I hope you and your loved ones are all keeping well and safe. Let me also add my sympathies and condolences to the sad news we had yesterday of the death of a prison officer, sadly, who passed away from COVID-19. Can I take this opportunity to pass on my condolences to his family, his loved ones and colleagues, all of whom I know will be suffering greatly at the loss of a very popular and much loved individual. Let me also place on record my sincere thanks. The work being undertaken by all of the justice agencies, frontline professionals and staff who are supporting the operational response across the justice system in tackling significant challenges raised by the COVID-19 outbreak. As I said in my statement to Parliament on Tuesday, in these unprecedented times, administrations across the UK and internationally are having to take exceptionally difficult action and decisions to boost and strengthen the justice response to help combat, curtail and control the spread of the virus. I'm very grateful to committee members and other MSPs for the approach they've taken in responding to the difficult situation and indeed the difficult issues that have arisen over the recent weeks. I'm keen to continue the work, to work with the committee in that spirit, and I'm very clear that scrutiny of our plans is only ever to be welcomed. In their role in enforcing social distancing, which has been central to our public health response, Police Scotland is to be commended. They've taken a common sense approach and sought to engage, educate, encourage, and then only as a last resort, use enforcement action. This has supported the vast majority of the public to comply with the regulations and guidance that is in place. Challenging times lie ahead. The flow of activity into the justice system has not stopped during the period of COVID-19. Despite mitigating actions, we know that there will be a significant backlog of both criminal and civil activity. The recovery phase will not be quick, and the implications will last for some time. I recognise there will be a strong desire from justice agencies, from victims, legal professionals and others to see case volumes increase, and to see the case volumes increase as quickly as possible, but we must also, of course, have a balanced approach in taking account of health advice and indeed in our continuing duty to protect the health of those attending and indeed working in our courts and other justice settings such as our prisons. Even at the end of this pandemic, I don't think we will, or indeed we should necessarily return to the justice system entirely as it was prior to this crisis. For example, the positive use of technology may well have longer term benefits. But of course, the challenges faced by governments across the globe to deal with the COVID-19 situation means that, of course, we must, as I say, take difficult decisions, and it's important that we do that to protect the safety of those we deal with. In conclusion, Convener, as Parliament and politicians continue to adapt and adjust to changes to the way parliamentary business is conducted, and also get used to new and innovative ways of engaging through the use of digital tools to support and keep the channels of communication open, I wanted to provide an absolute assurance that the Government will look forward to ongoing and regular engagement with the Justice Committee on a range of justice policy matters. I'm, of course, more than happy now to take a range of questions.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. We'll begin with the first question, which I'll ask. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide an update on the number of prisoners and prison staff who are currently self-isolating, preferably broken down by prison? And will you agree to ask the SPS to publish this information on a regular basis as requested by the Howard League and others? Also, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm if he has reviewed the level of financial resources available to bodies such as the WISE Group, SACRO, local authorities, the NHS, G4S, to ensure they are able to provide the vital support an increase in the numbers of prisoners being released will require to access accommodation, health, addiction services and benefits, as without this there is a very real danger they will fail and then potentially reoffend. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you, Convener. A hugely helpful and important question. In terms of the number self-isolating, there's currently 94 people in custody across 9 sites isolating as per public health guidance, and there's 12 confirmed positive cases. And I have seen some requests from the likes of the Howard League and others for more information and for information to be broken down by prison, for example, as you suggest. I'm very open to that suggestion, and I have already had a conversation with SPS to see how we can publish data on a more regular basis, and as much data as we possibly can. So that work is underway. There are obviously some sensitivities in relation to that. Plus, there are also some staff challenges that we face. As you can imagine, all of our, with the staff absences as they are, and I should say at this moment in time, staff absences are around about 19.7% of the total workforce. And this has actually come down from a high of about 25% at the beginning of this pandemic. But with those workforce challenges, you can imagine all attention is very much on the front line. But yes, I'm very open to more data being published. Your second point, I couldn't disagree with at all. It's clearly, for us, it's been a huge part of our thinking to engage with the likes of local authorities, the NHS, but you make an important point around SACRO, the WISE Group, G4S and others. First of all, if there are some resource implications, how do we look to address those? But also it's very clear that we need to engage with all of these bodies and more to ensure that those who are released get the appropriate access to accommodation, to health service, mental health provision, to addiction services, so that they don't just simply come back into the system. So that work is ongoing, and of course, as the committee wishes to be kept up to date, of course, I'm more than happy to do that as we begin to release prisoners.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That's helpful. On a similar vein, can you provide any information on the numbers of police officers and police staff who are currently absent from work due to coronavirus? And finally, given the Coronavirus Scotland Act has increased the maximum fixed penalty available from £300 to £500, can the Cabinet Secretary confirm the new types of offences which can now be diverted from prosecution under summary court proceedings as a result of this change, and the number of cases that have been diverted due to the increase of £500? Cabinet Secretary.
So forgive me on the second question, I don't have that detail to hand, but again, I'll write to the committee once we can get that further detail, because I think it is an important question that you asked, Convener, but forgive me, I don't have it to hand. Also, working digitally is a little bit more challenging than working with my papers in front of me, so forgive me, I'm looking for the detail that you've asked for in terms of those police officers, who are currently absent from work. And as of the 22nd of April, Police Scotland reported that 4.8% of its workforce was absent due to COVID-19 related absence. And again, that's come down from a peak of 12.5% as it was at the end of March. So there are significant reduction in staff absences, and no doubt the testing regime that we have in place is helping with that. But I will endeavour to get the detail that you've asked for in the second part of your question, in and around the impact that increasing the threshold of fines has had, and I'll send that to you directly, Convener.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. We now move to our second question, which is from Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. What impact has the current lockdown had on crime in terms of levels where it may have fallen, and in situations where people may be more vulnerable, for example, experiencing domestic abuse? And what additional support is being given to those who are most vulnerable at this time?
So in short, we certainly know that some crime types have gone down, some crime categories have gone down. That is undoubtedly related to the social distancing measures put in place. You know, people are not in pubs and bars on a Friday and Saturday night. So some crime categories absolutely have gone down, and Police Scotland can provide further detail of that. But Rona Mackay is absolutely right to mention the vulnerability. We are very acutely aware of the impact that lockdown has on vulnerability, both in terms particularly of vulnerable women in terms of domestic abuse, but also children in relation to child protection issues as well. So there's a lot of work going on, not just with Police Scotland, but of course, as you'd imagine, with our stakeholders and support services that are so important and vital to fighting and tackling domestic abuse. So we've given additional funding, as members will probably know, 1.5 million to both spread across Scottish Women's Aid and Rape Crisis Scotland. Also, the victim fund, which is available through Victim Support Scotland, has been increased to £100,000 to help meet the immediate financial needs of victims as well. So there is key vulnerability. As a government, we're doing what we can to work with our stakeholders to address that. And I can say that everybody, including Police Scotland, are very aware of that. And we're really putting all effort into making sure we can tackle those vulnerabilities.
Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That's very reassuring. Can I turn now to the issue of surgical face masks for police officers where social distancing isn't possible? The Scottish Police Federation say the masks don't provide adequate protection. You said in the Chamber on Tuesday that the SPF have not called for every officer to have FFP3 masks. Are you concerned that frontline officers might be at risk? And are there any plans to change or upgrade the PPE available to officers?
Cabinet Secretary.
So can I just confirm what I said in the Chamber? I have sought clarity from the Scottish Police Federation, and they are not calling for every single officer to have an FFP3 mask. I think that is important to reiterate on the record, but they do have some concerns, I understand, and they've made that sufficiently public around some of the revised guidance from Police Scotland. So I am due to speak to the Federation later on today in the afternoon, and I'm looking to see how we can help to address some of the concerns that they're raising on behalf of their members. But let me make it very clear from my regular engagement with the Chief Constable, DCC Malcolm Graham, who's leading on these efforts as well, that the revised guidance that Police Scotland have issued is absolutely aligned to the advice that is given from Public Health Scotland, from Public Health England. It is aligned to the guidance that the Scottish Government and the UK Government are following. And let me just say that for those officers on the front line who are attending an incident where there is a suspicion or a chance or a risk that they may come in contact with somebody who either has COVID-19 or indeed may well be suspected of having COVID-19, they will be given full PPE kit, and that includes the FFP3 face mask, but also a disposable suit, full knee-length boot covers, indirect vent goggles, long cuff nitrile gloves, and surgical masks as well. So the Police Scotland, I know, are rolling out the training of this at some considerable speed, a very impressive speed, and they've told me the latest figures they have is that over 7,500 officers have been trained and fitted with kits. So I'm very reassured that Police Scotland is taking the safety of their officers and their staff with absolute paramount importance. They're following the guidance that has been produced nationally. But what I would say is that I know where the Federation do have concerns. I'm more than happy to see how we can address those concerns.
Our next question is from Liam Kerr. Liam Kerr.
Thank you very much, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I would like to turn to the criminal courts, if I may. We know that a range of steps have been taken to support operations and reduce the risk of coronavirus spreading. And secondly, in your answer to Rona Mackay, you talked about crime rates, and this committee's heard how the Scottish Criminal Bar Association is suggesting there's been a decrease in offending during lockdown, but as we've heard from Victim Support Scotland and Scottish Women's Aid, certain crimes may be increasing. Given all of that, can you help the committee to understand two principal things, please? Firstly, what have been the practical impacts of the various steps taken within the courts on their operations? And secondly, are you able to provide the committee with any detail on how lockdown is affecting the number and nature of offences that are requiring prosecution, please?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks to Liam Kerr. It's a hugely important question. So because of the restrictions that we have, he'll know, because I know he's been involved, of course, in the discussions, that there's no solemn business, there's no jury trials currently underway, and really we are working on what the options may be in order to make sure that we make some kind of dent into that backlog. But what is being done at the moment is in the hubs that we have. So you may be aware the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, they've changed their operating model. They've essentially consolidated into 10 hub sheriff courts across 6 sheriffdoms. And they're taking as much of their business as they possibly can through written submissions, through virtual means, and indeed by teleconference where appropriate. But even then, they're having to prioritise urgent business. And again, just conscious of brevity, but we can send a link to the Justice Committee from the Scottish Court and Tribunal Service, which gives a very helpful grid on where the different courts are prioritising cases. And you can imagine these focus on issues such as child protection, on domestic abuse, as we've already heard from the Lord Advocate, and indeed others. And of course, issues that may be cases that may be time barred or coming towards their time limit. So urgent business is being dealt with. There's been some positive movement in terms of the civil courts as well in that regard. Yes, clearly, whatever we do, be it on solemn business or indeed progressing summary business, there is going to be, frankly, an enormous backlog, which is going to clearly have impacts on victims of crime, clearly, of course, on the legal profession and the courts. So already a fair bit of effort is going into looking at and reflecting on what action we can take to address that backlog.
Liam Kerr.
Yeah, and just thank Cabinet Secretary for that answer. And on that very important point that you make, Cabinet Secretary, about the backlog, can you tell the committee, have there been any discussions as yet between the Scottish Government and the Court Service, and indeed any other key players, about any additional resources that might be required, either in the short term or certainly the medium term, which might be required to deal with any of that backlog of cases?
Cabinet Secretary.
So that is an ongoing discussion. To deal with that backlog, I think all of us are of the understanding that is going to require resource. I cannot envisage how that would be done within current budgets. What we're asking our agencies to do right across, not just the justice sector, but across government, is of course having to keep close contact with them around the cost implications of the challenges we're all trying to seek to address. And of course, we'll need to see what we can do in relation to matching those financial pressures. That will not just come from the Scottish Government, but clearly there'll need to be discussions with the UK Government. And I suspect, I have to say, convener, and perhaps I'm going far above my grade here, but I suspect that there'll need to be some sort of almost European-wide, if not worldwide, look at stimulus packages in order to address some of the real challenges that governments right across the world are going to be facing for the next 12, 24 months, if not longer.
Our next question comes from James Kelly. James.
Thank you, convener. Can I turn to the area of prisons and echo the words from the Cabinet Secretary earlier, expressing condolences for prison officer, sadly. Cabinet Secretary, following the announcement on Tuesday on release of prisoners, can you update the committee on the timetable for when these releases will be scheduled? And can you also give an indication of the support that will be available to local authorities? I've already had concern expressed from a group of councillors in one local authority area who are already seeing increased demand on the resources as a result of the virus and are concerned about the release of prisoners and further demand that will make on the resources. So what additional resource will be available to local authorities supporting this release?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank James Kelly for a hugely important question, and can I say to him, if he wishes, even in confidence, to speak to me around those specific concerns of that individual local authority, then of course I'm happy to do that offline. But generally speaking, those concerns will be shared across local authorities right across the country. It is why our engagement with the COSLA is so vital in this matter. I spoke to Councillor Kelly Parry just a matter of a couple of days ago to speak to her exactly on this point. And again, in a similar vein to my answer to Liam Kerr, I don't doubt that we're going to have to work closely with local authorities on resource in relation to this. In regards to the first part of this question around the timetable, we think the plans we're putting in place will release a cohort of anywhere between 300 to 450 prisoners. And that range is quite wide, but depends on, of course, the Governor's veto and other review measures that exist. In terms of the timetable, we're planning to manage the release in 3 stages across the 28 days as per the regulations. So from the 30th of April, prisoners that have 30 days remaining of the liberation, expected date of liberation, they'll be released within the first 2 weeks. Those prisoners that have 31 to 60 days remaining, they'll be released within the 3rd week. And prisoners with 61 to 90 days remaining would be released within the 4th week. And I'm happy, of course, to put this in writing to the convener. The longer initial stage will allow greater time for planning for releases, precisely for the point that James Kelly raises. And it's important that support arrangements are put in place. But I'll, of course, put the detail of this in writing for the committee.
That's very much appreciated, Cabinet Secretary. Our next question is from John Finney. John.
Yeah. Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary, the emergency legislation has had a significant impact on the human rights of our citizens. Now, I warmly welcome Police Scotland's appointment of John Scott QC to oversee the application of these new pieces of legislation. Can you comment on the remit of his group and who comprises the group? And can you give the committee an assurance that their report will be made public along with your response in order that we can scrutinise this important area, please? And also on the question of human rights, can you comment, please, on the revised new guidance that the Lord Advocate has issued regarding holding suspects in custody before their first appearance in court, and how that compares to what was previously in place, please?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank John Finney for his question? Can I also say that I agree with him. I welcomed the steps proactively taken by the Chief Constable, and it was very much a decision for the Chief Constable proactively to set up this independent advisory group, and I have great confidence in his judgment in doing that, but great confidence also in John Scott's ability to rigorously test whether or not these emergency powers are being used in the correct and appropriate way. And my feeling, absolutely, from the first few weeks, is they absolutely are taking the right common sense approach. But it's important that there's that independence to that scrutiny. In terms of the membership, again, for brevity, that membership has been made public online on the SPA website, so we can direct members to an appropriate link. And also some additional members have been added, which I'm really pleased on. Some very prominent campaigners on human rights issues, on BME issues, on disability issues have been added as well. And I think anybody looking at that membership list, would say that these are people who have some not just weighty credentials, but would absolutely hold the police to account where necessary. So we'll send the link on. In terms of the remit of the group, or any terms of reference or the publishing of any report, my assumption would be that would absolutely be made public. But you will, I hope John Finney will forgive me, it's not a group that I have set up. It is a group that the Chief Constable has asked to set up in his operational independence. But I know he set up that group in order for a transparent, independent scrutiny of the powers. So therefore, I'm certain he will be listening to what John Finney has said, and I'm certain his approach already, even before John Finney's question, would have been to make as much of this public as possible. In terms of the second question, which was around, if I got it correctly, was the Lord Advocate's revised guidelines. Again, these questions would obviously be for the Lord Advocate in his role as the head of the independent system of prosecution of crime, and he can speak to the rationale behind the guidance. The guidance, again, is in the public domain, and for brevity, once again, we'll send you the link at the Crown Office's website. But the guidance essentially makes it clear that the test to be applied on these matters is whether there's a substantial risk to the victim, witness, or indeed the public, which cannot otherwise be mitigated. Just by way of background as well, that there's very clear and specific positions in the Lord Advocate's guidance around domestic abuse cases and the need for those cases to be treated particularly carefully. So again, I'm more than happy just to, again, conscious of time, to ensure that guidance is sent. And if John Finney or the convener wishes more information on the rationale behind that, then I'm very much happy. I'm sure the Lord Advocate would be happy to provide that in his role.
John Finney.
Thank the Cabinet Secretary for that reply. Cabinet Secretary, turning briefly to the tribunal system, can you provide some information on how teleconference is working within the system, particularly in relation to urgent and time-critical cases? For example, how is it working in relation to the mental health tribunal, please?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, can I thank John Finney for the question? So I've just been given updated information to say that John Scott QC's report will definitely be made public, and will go to the SPA board, and so therefore will be public. So that's good confirmation. I said in my opening remarks that the advancement of technology and the need for us to implement that technology across the justice system may well be something that we should absolutely keep for the longer term, not just for the current circumstances. And in fact, the way that the courts are having to adapt and are adapting to working remotely, I think is one of the positive benefits that we should continue. In terms of the specific point that John Finney asks, teleconference hearings are operating in tribunals, but only at this stage in the mental health tribunal. The procedure is that the mental health tribunal hearing clerks, they facilitate secure calls from the home. Parties dial in from their locations. Patients typically call in from hospital. Tribunal members and all other parties call from their homes or offices. So that's working well in the mental health tribunal. We're now very much looking at whether or not that can be rolled out to other tribunals. That's actively being considered, and I see no reason why other tribunals cannot look to follow mental health tribunals' lead in remote hearings for this current situation and indeed potentially for the future.
Liam MacArthur to ask the next question. Liam.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Very much following on the line of questioning from John Finney there, I would echo absolutely the concerns you stated at the outset, that the primary concern here is maintaining the safety and welfare of court staff as well as the wider public. But you'll be aware of concerns raised by Roddy Dunlop, QC, on behalf of the faculty, where he contrasted what he saw as the stalling of non-urgent business in civil courts with arrangements south of the border to use telephone, video and other technology to continue as many hearings as possible remotely. Concludes his letter to you, saying that there are, in short, readily available solutions for at least the resumption of procedural business. At a local level, I've heard of concerns about the granting of new guardianship orders, also the sorting out of powers of attorney. I think you've alluded there in your answer to John Finney that there has been work ongoing. But I appreciate an update on what's being done to set up remote hearings and facilitate the resumption of procedural business across our civil court service.
Cabinet Secretary.
I can thank Liam MacArthur for his question. Can I also give him an assurance I'm in fairly regular contact with Roddy Dunlop, QC, obviously in his role as the Vice Dean of the Faculty of Advocates, and he is not shy at all in coming forward with his suggestions, and I appreciate not just his suggestions but his experience as well. And it would be fair to say that if Roddy Dunlop and I were having a conversation 2 weeks ago, he would be very agitated about, and I think correctly so, of course, about as he perceived it, there to be a lack of progress on the civil side. I think if we were to speak to Roddy today, he would be far more positive. I have a message from Roddy, which I'm paraphrasing slightly, but says to the effect that things are moving in absolutely the right direction. And of course, let's try to see if we can continue the pace on that. And perhaps in the link that I said I would send earlier to my response to a previous question, that will give Liam MacArthur the table, will give him an indication of what is being prioritised within within civil business. You won't be surprised that there is a focus on family law cases, and of course those that are affecting vulnerable individuals, but largely in the family space. But also, of course, where there are time pressures, time bars, civil business will move forward. He probably has seen the announcement of matters progressing in the Inner House, and again, he will have seen this week that there was an appeal that was heard via remote means of a fairly high-profile case as well. So this work is ongoing. It's not going to happen overnight. It's already taken a number of weeks to get up and running. But the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service, I'm certain, would be happy to give a direct update to the Justice Committee on their plans. But of course, if you'd like a written update from me on this, then I'm more than happy to provide that in a bit more.
Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That does suggest that things have moved on. I welcome that and the offer of the update. I think particularly in relation to those issues of new guardianship orders and also powers of attorney would be very welcome indeed. The answer to this has probably already been touched on in the earlier response, but in setting up these Sheriff Court hubs, there has been concerns raised that those in remoter areas, such as the Orkney constituency that I represent, are therefore disadvantaged in terms of distances to travel. Some of this may be picked up in terms of being able to do more remotely, but what reassurances can you offer in response to those sorts of concerns?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I think it is an important concern today. So although we have the 10 hubs across the 6 sheriffdoms, we do of course understand that there may well be some impacts on those in rural, remote areas. Although I do stress that the vast majority of the business is being done through written submissions, through teleconference, through digital means, so there shouldn't be a need to travel in. All that being said, Liam MacArthur has raised, of course, this on a number of occasions in the Chamber, that there can often be challenges to broadband coverage, for example, on island communities and remote areas. So therefore, that can also have an impact on remote working. So let me give an assurance to take Liam MacArthur's question away, to make sure I raise it with the Scottish Courts and Tribunal Service to see what we can do in order to give more as much confidence as possible for those in remote and rural areas and island communities that they're not being disadvantaged by the setup that has been created.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Our next question comes from Shona Robson. Shona.
Morning, Cabinet Secretary. I want to just take you back to Police Scotland, if I may. You said in your opening remarks Police Scotland were taking a common sense approach, which I would certainly agree with. Just to take that a little bit further, are you satisfied that police officers are using their discretion wisely and encouraging people to comply with the new restrictions before moving to issue fines? How is this approach being monitored to ensure consistency? And has Police Scotland seen an increase in specific complaints since the introduction of the new powers? And have you, as Cabinet Secretary, sought any reassurances from the Chief Constable, SPA and the PERC that all complaints relating to new police powers will be rigorously investigated?
Cabinet Secretary.
Okay, so there's a fair number of questions, and then I'll try my best to go through them. In terms of am I satisfied, the short answer would be yes. I've been really not just satisfied, but quite heartened and pleased by the approach that Police Scotland and the Chief Constable have taken, and that's sometimes been a stark contrast to some forces in England and Wales. Not all, I wouldn't want to tarnish them all with the utterances of a few, but there have been some commentary from other police services across the country, which at the very least have raised an eyebrow in terms of how they've been communicated, whereas I think the communication from Police Scotland excuse me, has always been about a common sense approach, been very much focused on engaging, on encouraging and educating, and then of course as the last resort, enforcement. And we've seen that, frankly, from the numbers of fines that have been handed out, or the arrests that have been made. You can see that as a proportion of the interactions, they're very small in number. In terms of the kind of oversight of that, I suppose I would just go back to John Finney's point that he raised. The setting up of an independent advisory group led by John Scott will hopefully give people a reassurance that there's an independent process there, as well as the processes that already exist. If you wish to make a police complaint directly to the police, you can do that, and then follow that up, of course. Those processes still exist, but you also now have this independent advisory group role and remit as well. And I've seen that John Scott has been very proactive. I've seen him on social media, for example, where people have made a complaint on social media about police and the use of those emergency powers. He's been very quick to come in and say, can we have a chat? Can we get some details on that? So I've got a big confidence in that process. And I think also just injecting some realism in here. The approach from the Chief Constable has been very welcome. I think he and I would both be the first to say that there will be some police officers that may well get the approach wrong. And we have to be open to that, particularly because understanding the pace and speed at which these powers were introduced. But it is really important that we have that independent oversight. And I think that's, as I say, a really positive, proactive step taken by the Chief Constable.
Donna Robson.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. That's very helpful. Just to go back to tribunals for a moment, you talked about the use of remote hearings for tribunals. Obviously, the Mental Health Tribunal undertaking those at the moment. Can you give any timescale for the expansion to other tribunals, if possible? And also, you talked earlier about dealing with the backlog of civil court and tribunal cases and the prioritisation around that. Can you share some of the plans for how that will be undertaken with the committee? I think you said earlier on that you might well do that.
Cabinet Secretary.
Sorry, forgive me, Convener, and it may have been a technology issue from my end. I didn't catch the second question that Shona Robinson asked. I heard her ask about the timescales in relation to technology. I think I misheard, or couldn't hear the second question you asked.
Shona, would you like to repeat the question for the Cabinet Secretary, the second question? Shona.
Happy to do so. It was really about the plans being made for dealing with the future backlog of civil court and tribunal cases caused by the issues we're dealing with. You touched on that earlier, and just whether you were able to share some more detail about the prioritisation of that backlog going forward with the committee. I think you gave a commitment earlier to do that.
Cabinet Secretary.
Great. Yeah, thanks for repeating that question. In terms of timescales, I'm not able to give you that at this moment. But what I maybe will reflect on and I'll suggest is that I give a fairly regular update to the committee, be that in person. I'm always happy to do that via these remote means, or indeed by way of a written submission. I'm more than happy to give a very regular update. But you can imagine this work is being done at a pace. But also there's a fair bit of testing of that work. I mentioned the fact that the first appeal hearing that took place earlier this week went very successfully. But of course, if it hadn't gone, there would be a need to work through some of those technological challenges and issues. So certainly I don't have a timescale to hand other than everybody is working to pace. In terms of the backlog, again, a really difficult question to answer, because of course we're still working our way through understanding what the nature of that backlog will be. And of course, that backlog will change depending on whether or not public health guidance changes, whether restrictions are eased in the coming weeks, and what that may mean for business. So again, perhaps I can be useful in saying I'm happy to provide a regular update to the committee and to committee members on how that work is progressing.
Alistair Allen asks the next question. Alistair.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. You've touched a bit on the issue of the new powers that have been granted to the police. I'm just keen to know whether you felt, Cabinet Secretary, whether there was any emerging picture about the use of the fines in terms of whether the need for them is increasing or decreasing, whether compliance is increasing or decreasing, and whether you see the fines developing or changing in the future.
Cabinet Secretary.
Thanks to Alistair for the question. I keep in regular contact with Police Scotland, and they're very helpful in providing regular updates on some of the data. Just by way of the latest data I have, between the 28th of March and the 21st of April, Police Scotland reported the following enforcements: 27 non-essential businesses premises have been closed, 1,554 fixed penalty notices issued, and 76 people been arrested for failing to comply with the regulations. On that arrest figure, Police Scotland tell me a fairly significant number of those people would be people they would be interacting with, even out with the global pandemic. But again, just to confirm, that enforcement action really makes up a small number of the overall interactions that Police Scotland have had. So the message I get back from the Chief Constable in answer to your question is that the level of compliance across Scotland is still very, very high and is very, very good from the public. All that being said, we continue to monitor the data, and I note in the data that I have to hand that there was a rise in dispersals at the weekend, so 506 compliant dispersals and 41 dispersals after warnings, and that was on the 19th of April alone. So we can see that perhaps as social distancing and lockdown measures continue, and in fact as things like the weather continues to improve, we're going to continue to no doubt have to reiterate and re-emphasise the importance of that message of staying at home, protecting the NHS and saving lives, but clearly that will have its challenges.
Alistair Allen.
Thank you very much. That's broadly encouraging, I think. The other issue I was keen to turn to, however, was fire and rescue service. And I think probably most people appreciate the particular pressures on them just now in terms of them having to guard against the possibility of their own firefighters becoming ill or having to self-isolate or having to plan around that. So I was just keen to know whether we have any numbers around the number of firefighters who are self-isolating, and if you don't have that number to hand, a bit about what the planning is. Obviously, in some parts of Scotland, like my own, we're very dependent on retained firefighters. It's not easy to bring in people from other places. But it was just to get a picture of what kind of planning is going into ensuring that we can cope with scenarios where firefighters have to self-isolate.
Cabinet Secretary.
Yes, it's a helpful question, and can I say from the outset, if there's anything particular that Alistair Allen wishes to raise with me in relation to the constituency that he represents, that I know well, then of course I'm more than happy to take that offline with him, and that goes to any member, I should say. In terms of the numbers, I do have them. Just give me a second to bring them up. But as of the 22nd of April, so as of yesterday, there was 206 firefighters who are absent due to COVID-19. That makes up 3% of the workforce, so relatively low, I'm pleased to say. Of that number, 163 are self-isolating. Scottish Fire Rescue Service, I have to say, I've been hugely impressed. I always have been, actually, Justice Secretary, how versatile their workforce has been, how they've often not just done the work that they've needed to do in order to keep us safe from fire, fire-related matters, but also how they've worked with other public services to assist where they can. So the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service are, as well as doing their core functions, also working with a number of other partners as well, for, offering help to the Scottish Ambulance Service, for example. So I'm really grateful to them and for every fire officer and indeed fire staff for the work that they do.
I invite Fulton McGregor to ask the next question. Fulton.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I wanted to ask you a question that I asked in the Chamber just on Tuesday, and ask about the comments from the Lord President that about whether we can move between the homes of parents who do not live together. Do you think there's still a bit of uncertainty within the public domain? Personally, I feel that the Lord President's statement was quite clear, but given that I and others are continuing to get constituency queries on this, is there anything else you think that we can do to make that clearer?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I reflect on that? Can I also apologise if you can hear my 11-month-old daughter at the background? Can I say that, from my perspective, I think that the messaging is quite clear, but clearly, obviously, if Mr McGregor and others are continuing to get comments on this, emails in from constituents on this, then let me reflect on whether or not myself, the government, one of my fellow colleagues, ministers, maybe even the First Minister, whether we can do anything to reiterate the messages and the guidance. The guidance is at some points, it can be tricky because it does allow for an element of parental discretion, where a parent may feel that if the child was to move between homes, it could cause harm to that child. Therefore, that parent has to use their parental discretion where appropriate. So therefore, in that regard, because parental discretion is an important part of that decision, the guidance may not be black and white in that regard. So let me reflect. If there's anything more that I can do in terms of making a statement or reiterating the guidance, then of course I'm happy to do that.
Fulton McGregor.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that very helpful and thorough response. I wanted to follow that up and ask him about the priority that would be given to family court cases. Does he have any idea at which cases would be likely treated as more urgent? And what does he think any delays in the family court system, what the impact of that might be on vulnerable families, such as those affected by domestic abuse in particular? I'm just wondering if the Cabinet Secretary's got any comments on that.
Cabinet Secretary.
So again, I'll refer to the link that I'll send on to the Justice Committee that gives detail of the cases being progressed as urgent. And again, you will not be surprised that urgent family law cases are being looked at and will be prioritised, particularly where a vulnerable child is involved. In terms of the effect and impact, I mean, the inevitable delays in family cases, which will result will undoubtedly be the case, regardless of what we do. That will have an effect. I don't doubt that. So we're trying to put as much information as we can on the Parent Club website, again for parents who don't live together, but also we're continuing to support organisations like, for example, the Scottish Women's Rights Centre. They have a free legal helpline for kind of initial legal information. I've already mentioned the work that we're doing in relation to domestic abuse, but also I know for many fathers as well, this will be a difficult and challenging time as well, where they'll have concerns for their children. So therefore, anything we can do on that, and I'm happy to reflect on that more, then we will do that. But I also can't shy away from the very honest and very truthful answer which is regardless of our best efforts, there will be an impact on families and there will be an impact on those who are vulnerable.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I apologise to James Kelly? I omitted to bring you in for your follow-up. James, would you like to ask the Cabinet Secretary that now?
Thank you, Convener.
James.
Thank you, Convener. Can I turn back to prisons? Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how he can respect the human rights of prisoners and protect the mental well-being of prisoners, given the suspension of prison visits and also the change to recent prison rules on showering for prisoners and also limiting exercise?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, can I again say that I think this is a hugely important question. I'm pleased that we return to it. So, for me, the human rights of those in our care and also for those that work in our prisons is absolutely fundamental. It's why I took that very difficult decision to use the emergency early release powers. I know that was supported by James Kelly and his party, and I appreciate that support. But that is because I believe in the human rights of those in our care, as well as, of course, the human rights of victims as well. And the two do not need to be mutually exclusive, far from it. Turning to his specific question around the amendments made to the prison rules, and there's quite a number of them. I spoke yesterday to the Scottish Human Rights Commission, the Chief Inspectorate, Wendy Sinclair Gibbon of the Inspectorate of Prisons, the Independent Prison Monitors Association, and we had a really very positive discussion around the safeguards that we should put in place in relation to these amendments to the rules. And I gave them an absolute undertaking that I will reflect on not just their suggestions, but I'll reflect internally about can we create some sort of mechanism, some kind of overview mechanism that really scrutinises the use of these the new rules. Can I also say that Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons has given an indication that she'll be implementing remote independent monitoring of our prisons. I think she's going to release some details on that. My understanding is early next week, so that should be published. In terms of the prison rules, let me also just give James Kelly an assurance. These will only be used if necessary in terms of keeping people in our care safe, and indeed those who work in our prisons absolutely safe. They will not be used for any other reason. So I'm monitoring that use on a regular basis. And of course, again, I'm more than happy for the Justice Committee to be provided updates in that regard. In relation to prison visits, I couldn't agree more. That is going to cause a huge burden, and already is causing a huge strain on certain for prisoners. They have complied well, but it's also why I made the announcement about mobile phones, but also in terms of the time that will take, because of the security issues, the legal issues, the operational issues. What we've done is we've ensured prisoners are given extra credit to make additional phone calls, and indeed other appropriate measures have been taken. For example, the range of in-cell entertainment has been increased, as well as providing prisoners with additional mental health support as well in terms of information, which has been produced by psychologists and mental health experts. So forgive me, that's a relatively long answer, but there's a lot we're doing in this regard. And again, if you want any specific information, I'm always happy to return to the committee or indeed write to the committee.
That'd be extremely helpful, Cabinet Secretary. We've got supplementary from Liam MacArthur. Liam.
Thank you, Convener. Just very briefly, it's a request on the back of Fulton McGregor's question. He's absolutely right about the cases that are coming to all of us, I think, from parents who have split and where child arrangements are having to be negotiated in difficult circumstances. As he reviews the guidance with the Lord President that's been made available, can he bear in mind that in an island setting, for example, some of those logistics could be quite significant, getting on and off of ferries, for example, and therefore whatever guidance is issued or updated has to reflect the realities across Scotland. That a common sense approach can be adopted wherever those parents and children may be.
Cabinet Secretary?
I think it's a hugely important point, and the short answer to that is yes, I am mindful of these issues, but my circumstances as a step parent are very different. My stepdaughter, when she goes to her father's, he's a 5-minute drive away, and it's relatively easy, which is, of course, as Lee McCarthy says, simply not the case for everybody. So yes, the short answer is I will certainly reflect those concerns in the conversations that I have with colleagues and stakeholders.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Before we conclude, can I make reference to this week's parliamentary statement where you indicated that discussions on additional measures to deal with trials and solemn cases would now focus on what appear to be options 1, 3, 6 and 8 in the discussion paper. You've already said you will provide us with further information on information such as the timescales. But can you give an assurance that you will consult with the Justice Committee before reaching a final decision?
Yes, more than happy to do that, Convener. And I give an absolute assurance. I'm really happy to attend a remote session of the Justice Committee as often as you'd like me to do so. What I would say is that maybe it'll be an iterative process. There may be some options that we can progress with at a greater pace than others, but there will also be some great challenges on the options that I've identified, bearing in mind that people are anxious just going to the supermarket for their groceries, let alone attending potentially a trial that could last, if not a number of days, potentially even more than a week, with other people in the room, not just jurors, but also court staff as well. So, although these options may well look good on paper, we will work to work through them. They may actually have some very practical, pragmatic difficulties, but we'll continue to update the committee, of course, on that. And of course, if anything the committee wants me to appear in front of them, I'll make myself available.
That would be very, very much welcomed, Cabinet Secretary. I think, as one of the roundtable participants said then, best shouldn't be the enemy of good, and there's a lot of options we can follow there to make sure these trials can go ahead. Can I thank you, Cabinet Secretary, for the undertaking to provide the committee with the additional information, the guidance and the various looks we look forward to receiving these in due course. And that concludes this evidence session with you, Cabinet Secretary. Can I thank you and your officials for taking part in the meeting, and members for participating in their first remote committee meeting. That concludes the public part of this morning's meeting. The next meeting of the committee will be scheduled at an appropriate date. This will be notified in the business bulletin and via the committee's social media. In the meantime, any follow-up scrutiny work will be dealt with by correspondence, which will be published on our website. We now move into private session. Thank you all for participating.